Hello there. I hope I have some interesting subjects for you this week. I wanted to start by looking at power chords and music theory. Power chords, maybe you know, that's the bright sound that rock guitarists use. It gives you the feeling like we're all going on some great journey together. And those chords, that sound, is made from a root note and the fifth in the octave. And then they add the do, the root, above it. So you've got do, then the fifth, and then the do of the next highest octave, which gives you this bright sound that's so reminiscent of Western guitar music. I was just reading about it this morning. Because they are using the fifth, power chords are also sometimes called fifth chords. The octave above the root gives the guitar chord even more power. Unlike conventional chords, triads, power chords do not use the third, as this would make the chord sound muddy and undefined. Interesting. What I take from that is that, of course, the triad and the third is used initially for the lowest story, but when you move to the second story and the fifth comes into play, you have a higher triad. The first note of that second story is the resolution of the underlying level. But basically, when you move into the second story, you have to let go of the first story. The laws of life exist again at the level of the second story. In my opinion, the Christian society, that era of a Christian inspired and imbued world, was a second story world. That was the meaning of it. It had its own order, but it was inspired from above. It started having light inside of it. That's the second story world. And so as we work through the octave in 3 phases, each phase has its rules, and each phase is discrete. This is one of the reasons why there is an inner circle, a middle circle, and an exoteric circle. And this is why there were only a small group of apostles. They were the inner circle, and from there it spread outwards. And of course that means that the global world, where everything is open, is a world that can only decline. As a side note, I just checked on the Amazon bookshop today. I had a look through the most recently published books that come under Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and I can only say that I'm glad that those men are dead, so that they don't have to witness what is being done in their name. I think it is almost impossible to find any book about Gurdjieff that takes the cosmology, constructs practices directly from it, and has results that relate to those practices and the cosmology. Nevertheless, Gurdjieff knew exactly what was going to happen, and he said that the people around him were not real, and for that reason he lost the priory and many other things besides. Therefore, knowing the limitations of the situation, and according to him, having been attacked by planetary forces and losing so much, he did what only a warrior can do, and that is he buried all his knowledge in a book and guarded it and gave it the required characteristics to not only be strongly defended but fueled to carry it into future eras where somebody may arise who can understand it. Now let's talk just very briefly about science, which is so boring, but let's just do it. I've got this photo here of a scientist, an Asian woman, looking through a microscope at some substances. She probably was taught in some university and imagines she's doing the scientific method. That's not what's happening here at all. I'll just illustrate I'll illuminate what's happening. What scientists do is, by focusing on things in front of their vision, whilst having a conceptual idea in their head, they actually activate various areas in the forehead which strengthen and increase the power of their intelligence to some degree. They're pushing those faculties, which are ordinary faculties, but they're just pushing them a bit further forward. And so scientists do indeed get results because they have worked out a way to slightly increase their intelligence. And that's what they do. That's what science means. Science is not according to the scientific method. Now, for instance, the structure of the DNA, which is double helix, famously was received by a scientist who was at Cambridge University. He received it in his dream. He had a dream of two snakes interwrapped. And when he woke up in the morning, he went back to the laboratory and said, oh yes, this is the structure, it's a double helix. He did not discover that structure through the scientific method, but actually he received it in a dream. And so what scientists think is happening is not what's happening. They know what they're doing is valuable. It forces those functions to be concentrated. And it does indeed increase their intelligence a little bit. Now, interestingly, Buddhists know that sitting in meditation does something good for you. And you have to sit for a very long time, you have to be well taught. But if you ask them why they're doing it, they will say, oh, because we're all emptiness and we don't exist. Because our existence is just false and it is dependently co-arising, and that nothing really exists. Of course, any sane person would say, well, if we don't exist, what the hell are you doing all this shit for? Go back to work or jump off a bridge or something. Somehow the technical knowledge, the insight into what's happening inside has been lost. So they just carry on doing it, they do get the effects, but they don't understand why. Now, Gurdjieff, probably the only person on this planet who ever really could understand these things, he described all the layers of existence as part of the scale of octaves, which, in my opinion, that is correct. And when Buddhists enter into a higher state, they're simply entering into the next turning of the octave, the next highest octave, something like that. Similarly, love is a word that's used a lot in society. What does it really mean? Well, perhaps it just means any feeling that comes from a higher part of the octave. Perhaps that's all it means. Similarly, when people talk about presence, God, such words, they're referring to something that feels good of a higher ilk. And maybe some of those words define something emotional, high emotional, and some of those words like consciousness related to high intellectual. Okay? All these experiences and all identities do come from specific centers of functioning in one of the bodies. That is a fact. You are a structure that has multiple bodies and functions in each body, and all these practices, they, in some sort of instinctive way, people have worked out how to trigger different things. In the arts of Qigong, they say that heaven is covered by the stars, the earth is covered by rivers, and the man is covered by meridians. This shows that they have knowledge of scales and the structures of the bodies in scales. And they also know how to work directly with them. For instance, there is alchemy of the 5 elements of the earth, there is alchemy of the sun and the moon, and there is alchemy of the body of stars, the Milky World. So it would seem that on this planet those arts retain the most knowledge. Although in India their particular interest seems to be to fully and irrevocably enter higher identity. That's why they have all these I am practices. I am Brahman, or as Ramana Maharshi would say, abide within the I thought. Their sense of things is to penetrate irrevocably into a higher identity. So that's their particular flavor of cuisine they have there. It's obviously very important. The scientist, feelings are not included in the experiment. Neither is psychology, neither is the scientist herself. I mean, the whole point of science is to remove human beings from the picture. Whatever results you get from science, it may provide something useful. Yes, it could do. It's never going to be a whole picture of the world. Neither are scientists looking to include all the parts of life in it, which is a terrible error. And so scientists do sometimes get some results, but then it all goes wrong. And when it all goes wrong, perhaps with 5 cups of tea, you find that scientists just start burying the bad news. And a lot of people get on the train of burying the bad news. They just can't bear it because their frame of reference does not open them to any possible advancement. Now here's something else which is very interesting. If I sit with women and they talk together, I often get the feeling that, the words don't matter so much because women are more about feelings, and they seem to be particularly gifted at balancing and exchanging and soothing feelings together. And when I walk away with a chest full of feelings. That's the experience, And so with women, it's clear to me that the words don't mean very much. I mean, they could talk about holidays or celebrities or nachos. The words don't mean so much. They're really sharing feelings, right? Of course, when I'm with men, the words are very important because, we talk about power tools and the history of 16-valve sports cars. Technical information, right? Men, they use words correctly, don't we? Well, maybe not. I tend to think that men and women are companions. They are equivalent, but in different polarities. So perhaps it is with men that actually the words don't matter either. It's just that they are sharing the mental information that men seem to have more of. They're stronger with mental information. When you leave a group of men, it's like your mind has been refreshed, and maybe the words don't matter so much either. And after all, if you listen to somebody who is sensitive and has a clear mind and gives you very clear sense of things, it freshens your mind so that you can walk away and think and feel and do more. You're grateful for that. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the utter fools who front up all the marketing for the scientific companies these days, who simply create wrong work by joining phony, sugary emotions to their products. I don't mean those kind of people. I mean people where you walk away with clarity in your mind and a sense of meaning and purpose. This morning I was doing the washing up and it just suddenly shook through me that knowledge, what knowledge is, it's a very high thing. It's very, very difficult to get knowledge. It is a kind of evolution, and the cost is absolutely colossal. So today, in the world, everybody's sharing all these words. It means fuck all. Nothing at all is happening here. These are just empty words. And we live in a world that is post-mutiny. What do I mean by that? I mean that a ship has a captain, a first mate, a second mate, and then there are the hands. And the hands frequently sit below deck, imagining that if they only kill the captain and pour out the rum, that everything's going to be great. And sometimes they manage to do that. They kill the officers, the crew, and they get into the wheelhouse and into the stores, and they start drinking and partying and playing, just like those who danced around Jesus as they nailed him to a cross. There are many people in our society that are at that level. They're simply unable to really discipline themselves, and they are the people that benefit most from a structured and ordered society. And perhaps they have all sorts of dreams. And we live in a world that is post-revolution, where the structure and order of Western society at least has been completely destroyed. And for my own self, I just realize how harmful it is when you go into society and you are inundated with their voices. It's all just desperate. My teacher said that humanity only needs one teacher. It would be sufficient. There have been times in history where a particular animal, a horse, a dog, excelled in the field of battle or somewhere else in life. They did something that was brave. They saved somebody, saved a ship. They put their life on the line, and that animal was given a name. They earned their name and became a man. A man called Plavan, who is a movements teacher, who came through Osho and seemed to have achieved great things, leading movements groups for many years, along with Amio and perhaps some other students who came through Osho, and I congratulate him for all his work. And he has a very small and unobtrusive YouTube channel, but it is full of quality. And so I will put a link down below, and why don't you go and have a look at every single one of his videos. It's worth it. It's a rare dose of quality. When he tried to communicate with the official Gurdjieff groups from the 80s onwards, he found that they had dispensed with the movements. It seems to have been about 30 years after Gurdjieff had died. It was after meetings with remarkable men had been made. After that, the movement seemed to have vanished, and many of the groups that grew up, no doubt coming from the three amigos of the Anglo-Saxon culture, these groups did not like to do any hard work, Gurdjieff said, and they don't seem to have liked doing the movements much either. And at about the same time, Madame de Salzmann flew off to India and, hung around with Jiddu Krishnamurti, Sai Baba and various other yogis. And to be honest with you, anybody who has a YouTube channel or presence on the internet is highly questionable. Okay. Now, Ouspensky, along with many other people, often wondered, how can we break into life? How can we reach a different depth, a different dimension? Where are all those subtle things that sometimes people talk about? Do we need a new kind of science? Obviously our instruments only detect this three-dimensional world. We would need some different kind of instruments, wouldn't we? And in retrospect, these ideas do say quite a lot. This is a very old voltmeter, and it measures volts. And if you plug it into a certain place, the needle will go up and it will say 50 volts, right? And so that you know that 50 volts are passing through that part of the circuit. What happens if I replace the words vault on this meter and instead write in something else, for instance like astral particles. It's the same measurement and the same equipment, however the meaning that is interpreted from it is actually according to the conception that I've been taught in my school. And perhaps there is a higher world that uses exactly the same instrument, but they use it to measure and interpret a different thing. So in fact the instruments don't need to change. What needs to change is our conceptions of the world. But even further, Gurdjieff tells us that our conceptions of the world relate to the inner functioning that is within this society. In other words, the flow of energy through the stories and the centers of the people in it, who then emanate a different type of energy. They see a different kind of world, and they transform a different kind of energy. This is critically important. This is not a mere thought experiment. This is actual. For instance, if I took this voltmeter and showed it to some cavemen or some people from a very different society who are functioning differently, they would not understand, they would not see. The fact that we are able to use this instrument and read volts is according to the development that exists in our society today, that is given to us from the work and labours of the people from the past. Now this is critically important because in the world there is this idea that we're developing, and that by talking about things we're going somewhere. Human beings have not the slightest clue what evolution and development would actually mean. And when they look at religions, which are indeed quite difficult to get your head round, they do not see anything good. It's quite hard to express how blind the entire species are, and they only have two options to understand the world. First of all, they can go into the dead science and the dead culture that is in front of them, that has lost momentum, lost spirit, and has reached what Gurdjieff called equilibrium. It no longer has any momentum in it. And it is actually momentum, meaning living transformation, that determines whether you can learn. You can only learn from a culture that has a momentum. Its particular makeup, its particular level doesn't mean anything. It needs to have momentum, otherwise it is only a death culture. And I think you can see that very clearly if you've got a real world problem. It doesn't matter how bad it is. As soon as you start working on the solution, you feel good and everything changes. And as I was saying, a man has only two options in this world. He either goes into the existing culture, which today he would find to be sterile and zero momentum, zero energy, or he has to drift around with the fantasists of the religious world. Which of course means that the two polarities of the external and the internal world have become fully separated in the winter of our society. All human beings want the thing to improve. All human beings imagine they are working towards something and that there's some sort of evolution happening. It is not. It is hidden. It is hidden, and it's quite hard to explain how it's hidden. All this shit that they're doing out there, from the NGOs to United Nations, everything, it's just all meaningless. Human beings cannot see, and it's hard to explain why not. And in this situation of pure terror, of being a sort of half-blind species that senses that something is badly wrong, they have managed to stabilize it through the false self, where everybody sticks on the saccharine smile, and somehow that helps them to get through the day. That is the world we live in today. Of course, sometimes society does have momentum in it, and people can live from it and have a sense of really going somewhere, but they can't really explain why that is. In other words, human beings do not really have the ability to detect or to explain the difference between when things are going well and when things are going badly. That is not good. You take care.
Look at this face, I know the years are showing. Look at this life, I still don't know where it's going. I don't know much, but I know I love you. And that may be all I need to know.
Look at these eyes, they've never seen what matters. Look at these dreams, so big and so better.
I don't know much, but I know I love you. And that may be all I need to know. So many questions, still left unanswered. So much I've never broken through.
And when I feel you near me, sometimes I see so clearly the only truth I've ever known is me and you.
Look at this man, so blessed with inspiration. Look at this soul, still searching for salvation. I don't know much, but I know I love you. And that may be all I need to know. But I know I love you. That may be all I need to know. I don't know much, but I know I love you. That may be all there is to know. Whoa.